Well, good afternoon, everybody. Looks like we're finally up and running here. Welcome to today's Democratic primary debate for Indiana State House District 58, located in northeastern Johnson County, including the communities of Greenwood and Whiteland in central Indiana. I'm Scott Aaron Rogers, host of the Who's Left podcast, and your moderator for today's discussion. This debate is presented by the Progressive Indiana Network, an independent media collaborative supporting Indiana-focused progressive journalism, analysis, and commentary. The network provides a shared platform for writers, podcasters, and creators committed to covering state and local politics with independence and accountability. You can learn more at progressiveindiana.net. Primary elections are where the direction of a party is decided, not just who carries the banner in November, but what that banner actually represents. Today, we're here with the two candidates seeking the Democratic nomination for Indiana House District 58 in fast-growing suburban Johnson County. Joining us are Michelle Hennessy-Sears and Eric Reingart. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Here's how this is going to work. After each candidate's 2-minute opening statements, we're going to move through 4 topic areas: housing, affordability, healthcare, and education. Each of you will have 90 seconds to respond to each question. Later, we'll move into a segment where I'm going to put a spotlight on an area of genuine disagreement within the Democratic Big Tent, because Democrats don't always agree, and voters deserve to know where these two candidates actually diverge. We'll wrap up with closing statements. One more thing. This is a Democratic primary debate, but the issues we're discussing don't belong to one party. They belong to the people of District 58. So, let's get into it. As determined by coin flip backstage, Eric will go first. Eric, you have 2 minutes for your opening statement.
Well, thank you for having me. Despite all the technical difficulties, it's good to be here with you guys today. I got into this business. I ran for office because it's not so much a self-interest thing, but it's when you get personally affected by something and then you see everyone your age affected by something, it really makes you want to do something about it. And what I'm talking about is the housing crisis, the housing affordability crisis, and the cost of living that's been going up for years and years and years while wages are stagnating. We have an economy that doesn't work for most people. It works for a very small amount of people. And we have inefficient fiscal policy, not just in Indiana, but in the whole country. There's been inefficiencies with our tax policy and with our housing policy. So I've learned a lot when I joined an organization called the Public Revenue Education Council. I became a board member, and I learned a lot when I worked at Aspire Johnson County, where they do economic development work for the area. And what I learned is we need to build more housing, and we need to do it fast and do it soon. We already have a housing bubble as it is. Economists are predicting a crash around this year. I already saw some news reports about home sales falling. So we have a tricky situation in our economy, and I've learned a lot about some interesting policy solutions like the land value tax, upzoning to increase density and housing supply, and I think these solutions need to be implemented here in Indiana.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Michelle, 2 minutes opening statements to you.
Okay, thank you so much for having us. And I'm glad that everybody stuck it out through our technical difficulties. My name is Michelle Hennessy-Sears. I am a board certified behavior analyst. I have my master's degree in behavior analysis. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology that I earned at the University of Southern Indiana in 2007. I have 4 children, 3 bonus kids, and 1 that is genetically mine, all teenagers. My husband and I have lived in Johnson County for a little over 4 years now. Prior to that, we lived in Morgan County, so both kind of technically those bubble counties that are rural. I've owned and operated ACE Autism Center for Enrichment in Greenfield, Indiana, which is Hancock County, for the last 10 years. Prior to that, I worked at for another applied behavior analysis therapy company. I've worked residential facilities with children and adults with disabilities. I have worked for the state of Indiana previously as a caseworker for the Department of Child Services, as well as the Department of Correction. I decided to throw my hat in the ring and run because I have been personally impacted and professionally by the things that our current legislation is doing. In 10 years working in healthcare, I've never seen anything that has been so egregious as what we're currently dealing with. And a lot of it is on the backs of very hardworking people. So I decided to throw my hat in the ring to, be elected to make a difference in Indiana and hopefully beyond.
Thank you, Michelle. So, a theme that we're going to talk about here at the beginning of our program is priorities. And I want to start by talking about your governing priorities. The Indiana General Assembly is controlled by Republican supermajorities in both chambers. The governor is a Republican. The lieutenant governor is an avowed Christian nationalist. Unless something dramatic happens in November and we're talking historic against all odds blue wave territory, that is the reality you're walking into if voters send you to Indianapolis. So, before we dig into the specific issues facing families in District 58, I want to start with priorities. Not wish lists, but your actual governing priorities. What is the one thing you believe you could actually get done in that environment, whether that's passing a bill, stopping a bad one, or forcing a conversation the majority would rather avoid? And how specifically would you make it happen? Michelle, you're up first.
So for me, it's definitely healthcare. Our healthcare system is irreparably broken, mainly because of for-profit commercial insurance companies. One of the ways that I would propose to support not only our healthcare in general, but our healthcare providers would be to submit legislation that would hold commercial insurance providers accountable for paying their providers within 10 business days. Presently, from the date that a claim is submitted to the date that it could potentially be processed and paid is upwards of 30 to 60 days. And that's only if they process and pay that claim. They can absolutely deny that claim. And then it's on the provider or the patient to then appeal that claim, which starts that clock all over again for an additional 30 to 60 days. I don't know about anybody else, but if you are providing a service to somebody, how many people could go without being paid for upwards of 60 to 120 days?
Mm-hmm.
No one. So that's definitely something that needs addressed. And I feel like anybody who is not taking super PAC money that is from your large healthcare providers could get on board with that.
Thank you, Michelle. Eric, same question to you. 90 seconds for you.
My top priority would be the housing issue and the housing crisis. And my concept, approaching the state house, staring down the barrel of like a Republican opposition party supermajority, Republicans have to live in this state too. Conservative people need affordable housing too. It's really not a partisan issue. I believe I can try to build I want to call it a house party, kind of like how they used to have a tea party. I want to call it a house party. I want to invite Republicans, independents, liberals, conservatives, anybody from across the political spectrum to put the housing issue front and center and the affordability issue. I do agree with everything Michelle was saying about healthcare. I feel like healthcare is downstream of the housing issue. Housing is your basic cost of living. It's foundational to your cost of living. And to own a house or to live here as a renter, that's your stakehold in the community. And people who can't afford a place to live, they definitely can't afford healthcare services at that point. They definitely can't. It's hard to get a job if you're homeless. People are constantly in a chronic unemployment cycle. Housing is the foundation. Once you have a stable place you can rest your head every night, suddenly approaching a job is easier. Suddenly finding income for healthcare is easier. Not that housing is a direct solution to the healthcare crisis. Michelle was more specific about the policies for healthcare, but we need to put forward some new housing solutions. There's a lot of fresh ideas coming out that people are excited about. I was at a Democratic Party meeting in Johnson County, and a lady brought up Abundance by Ezra Klein, that new book that came out, essentially talking about how building more housing, increasing the housing supply, drives rents and prices down. That's how we create affordability.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, that's time there. And I just want to remind you guys, because we kind of rushed to get this thing going today, that when you come off of full screen and we all sort of come back there, you got about 20 seconds to wrap up your statements. There. We'll give you about a 10-second grace period. We're not going to give you the gong. But I do want to start with our next question. And you've both told us your priorities. Now let's talk about Governor Mike Braun's first priority upon taking office. In 2025, the Republican supermajority passed Senate-enrolled Act 1, what Governor Braun called, quote, historic tax relief. Here's what that so-called relief actually looks like. Homeowners got a minor credit of up to $300. Large property holders and businesses got exemptions that grow over time, and to pay for it, cities, counties, and school districts are projected to absorb hundreds of millions of dollars in losses. Braun's response to local officials warning about the damage? Prove it and do more with less. So, what does tax fairness actually look like in Indiana? In your view, where should the tax burden primarily lie? And what would you do to address the downstream damage SEA 1 is already causing in communities like those in District 58? And Eric, you get the first crack at this one.
I'm really glad I do, because that particular piece of legislation is what really motivated me to get out and run for office. When we do these types of property tax relief, it's a little misleading to call it that because it's not quite relief. What's happening is we're doing what California did with Proposition 13 in, I think, 1975. They restricted the amount of property tax revenue they could collect. They created a situation where investors bought up homes, drove up prices. California has some of the worst housing crisis issues in the country. Florida, under DeSantis, is kind of trying to do the same thing. We shouldn't do that. That bill is not good news for us. And just like you mentioned, local government people, even Republicans, because they have to deal with the facts of the matter with the money that they have and the tax system that they work with, they're very pragmatic, and they do not like this Senate Bill 1. They do not like what's going on. It's going to be offset by income taxes. It'll fall onto workers to pay the tax burden. At the Public Revenue Education Council, we are big fans of a reform known as land value taxation, but how that is done by a split rate property tax. We need to keep the tax on land value. This discourages investors from buying up land and properties. But if we get rid of the tax on the buildings and the improvements themselves, people can build more housing, improve housing stock that already exists without getting a property tax hike, penalty because they increase the improvements value. It's been proven in Pennsylvania that this works. They tried to do it recently in Detroit. Historically, Detroit had a land value tax, and that's the reason Henry Ford built his factory there. I read and found out. So we need smarter tax solutions than the Senate Bill 1.
Thank you, Eric. Michelle, how about you?
So, Senate Bill 1, it is definitely it's harming families. It's harming the middle class. And ultimately, it needs to be repealed. However, without it being repealed, I think things that we can do would be to increase taxes on individuals and businesses that are grossing over $5 million a year. If you are grossing over $5 million a year, there's absolutely no reason why you cannot pay your workers a living wage. There's absolutely no reason why you should be paying your CEO $500,000. And in doing so, we can increase that tax basis. The other alternative would be marijuana legalization. Presently, Indiana is missing out on probably about $180 million in additional tax revenue by not legalizing marijuana. So people are going to all of the states surrounding us, purchasing marijuana, bringing it back, and we're missing out on that tax revenue.
Thank you, Michelle. So we talked about Governor Braun's first priority. Now let's talk about the House Republicans, your potential colleagues' first priority. Indiana has a real housing problem. Studies suggest the state is somewhere short around 50,000 homes. The average first-time home buyer in Indiana is now 40 years old, and only about 17% of Hoosier households can afford a median-priced new home. So, when House Republicans made housing their top priority this session, there was at least a real problem to solve. What they came up with was House Enrolled Act 1001, a bill that limited local zoning authority, streamlined development approvals, and restricted what cities and counties can require of new construction. Supporters said it cuts red tape and gets more housing built. Critics, including Johnson County's own Republican Commissioner Brian Baird, said it was a one-size-fits-all mandate that limits local planning authority without actually guaranteeing affordability outcomes. Now, the bill passed comfortably, but not along traditional lines, with members of both parties on either side of the final vote. So, here's the question. Did HEA 1001 actually address Indiana's housing crisis, or did it mostly just make life easier for developers? And what would a real solution look like that gets affordable housing built without limiting communities' ability to decide what's right for them? And Michelle, I'll start this one with you.
So it made life easier for developers. Ultimately what needs to happen is that we need to be holding developers and corporations accountable for the quality that they're putting out and what they're charging based on that quality. So here in the community that I live in, we recently learned that there is a plan to develop the areas surrounding this neighborhood. And unfortunately, they're wanting to put a substantial number of homes onto a very small piece of property. However, statistically, what happens is that those homes will not be of the same aesthetic or quality that the present homes are. When that happens, your crime rates have the potential to increase, therefore increasing the cost on your community to pay for increased safety and security. Now, we absolutely have a housing crisis. I was fortunate enough to be old enough that I have purchased more than one home. And as far as what do we need to do about it, it's a matter of giving control back to local places so that they can really determine and hold corporations accountable.
Thank you, Michelle. Eric, let's hear from you.
This is a big topic for me. So right now, people are stuck between two things. One, we need more housing to increase the supply. That lowers the price. That solves the housing crisis if we have enough housing for everyone. But we don't want to destroy local character of neighborhoods. It's called the not in my backyard movement. A lot of people oppose housing developments when they're around their area, and they might drive down their property prices. The solution is that bill was I want to say a step in the right direction, but it does not get to the heart of the issue. The heart of the issue of the housing crisis is the land crisis. The reason most house prices go up, it's because of the land price underneath, not because the house is magically getting prettier and its pipes are fixing themselves and the windows are looking nicer. The location value, where the plot of land is and where that house is put on top, that's what goes up in price. If we have a land value tax system, a split rate property tax system that actually does get to the core of the issue, upzoning helps. Allowing more types of housing options to be built helps. But here's the best part. Best of both worlds, LVT causes infill development in the middle of cities where underused land plots are, instead of sprawling outwards, where most of the issues are being caused, where people don't want all these developments. It puts the developments downtown instead of out in rural and wild lands, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we've talked about housing affordability. Now, let's talk about the state's response to people who can't afford housing at all. This year, Senate enrolled Act 285, which passed after failing twice before, bans camping, sleeping, or sheltering on public property. Violators, meaning people with nowhere else to go, can be charged with a Class C misdemeanor, facing up to 60 days in jail and a $500 fine. Supporters say it's about compassion, connecting the unhoused to services. Critics, including the Indiana Sheriff's Association, pointed out that those services largely don't exist. And as one Democratic senator noted, because you can simply move 300 feet down the street and not violate the law, this is essentially a game of whack-a-mole, but toying with people's lives. Every Democrat in the legislature voted against it. A significant number of Republicans did too. Research consistently shows that the most effective approach to reducing homelessness isn't criminalization, it's what advocates call housing first, getting people into stable housing before addressing the other challenges in their lives. Indiana, meanwhile, just made it illegal to sleep outside without building a single new unit of affordable housing or funding a single new shelter bed. So the question is, what is Indiana's moral and practical obligation to its unhoused residents, and what specific policies would you support to actually reduce homelessness rather than just move it out of sight? Eric, back to you for this one.
That was also a bill that really stuck with me. I heard about it when I was involved with the Johnson County Housing Coalition. That bill came out in the news, and it was very disheartening to hear that. I'm going to have to not be preachy, but I'm going to have to remind a Christian majority state of a certain piece of scripture I remember hearing. Jesus said that the birds of the air have nests and foxes have holes, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. And when we're taking our land, Indiana's land, and we're being essentially abusive to people without housing, giving them no places to go, they have no idea which areas are illegal or legal. It's just a punishment bill. It does nothing to solve the housing crisis. It makes it worse, actually. That's the moral problem with it. The solution is to build more housing and to drive prices down, to make it more affordable, and not do legislation like that just punishes people who are at their most economically desperate. We don't have to be a theocracy. We don't have to, the government doesn't have to have my religious beliefs or anything, but I really think that the Bible tells us how to treat people who are without material goods.
Thank you, Eric. Michelle, 90 seconds to you.
I'm going to say, Matthew 25:40. Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Clearly, our GOP legislators are not practicing what they're preaching. We need to be pouring more money into mental health. We need to be pouring more money into providing housing and support systems for people that are displaced, for people that are homeless. Statistically, 67% of people that are homeless have a mental health disorder. We need to be putting money into our social services and into our social supports. Because if we're not taking care of those that are the least of us, what are we really doing? We're not really doing what we are called to do. We're not working the way that we should be.
Thank you, Michelle. So, the second House Republican priority this session was utility regulation. House enrolled Act 1002, which moves Indiana toward performance-based rate making and adds some consumer protections. A step forward, sure, but Democrats offered a slew of amendments to make it stronger, capping rate increases, eliminating the 7% sales tax on residential utility bills, freezing fixed charges, even preventing private equity firms from acquiring utility companies. Every single one was voted down by the Republican supermajority. That last one turned out to be particularly prescient. The day after the legislative session ended, conveniently, critics noted, AES Indiana's parent company announced a $33.4 billion deal to be taken private by a consortium led by BlackRock. AES serves customers right there in Johnson County. The company says rates won't be impacted, but the BlackRock fund involved is targeting annual returns of 15 to 20%, nearly double what publicly traded utilities have historically generated. That money comes from somewhere, and it won't come from Wall Street. Layered on top of that, data centers. Indiana is racing to attract them. They consume enormous amounts of electricity, and the infrastructure costs to serve them are typically passed on to residential ratepayers. When a data center goes dark, guess who's left holding the bill? At the end of the day, AES Indiana is a regulated monopoly, meaning you have no choice but to buy from them. Some would argue that's exactly why utilities shouldn't be in private hands at all. So the question is, was HEA 1002 anywhere near close to enough? And what does the state actually owe its residents when it comes to keeping the lights on at a price they can afford? Michelle, you'll have the first opportunity to tackle this one.
Our utilities are not a private commodity that can just be sold to, really what amounts to a private equity consortium. It will raise prices. People are going to be drowning in debt from utilities. People will have their utilities shut off. And what happens when those utilities are shut off? Well, somebody's going to have to pick up and foot the bill to have them reconnected. It's truly all a scam for for BlackRock to make a ton of money off of hardworking people. We need to keep our public utilities public, and we need to ensure that the infrastructure is there for successful delivery of our utilities. As far as data centers, it's definitely going to raise prices, and that shouldn't be passed on to residents of Indiana.
Thank you, Michelle. Eric, let's hear from you.
We've been around the block before with electricity problems and being able to have affordable electricity run to our homes. And FDR built the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. The public sector is the only thing that is able to run a natural monopoly. A natural monopoly is an economics term for those things like utilities. Roads are a natural monopoly. The power lines are a natural monopoly. Owning land itself is a type of natural monopoly. These things are best dealt with in the public sector, in the public sphere. I completely agree with Michelle to keep utilities public. Privatizing monopolies is creating higher prices. The only way the private sector lowers prices is through competition. There needs to be more options for service providers. That is what lowers the price. But certain industries like a power line, you get one choice. You get the power company. You get the electrical provider. So those power companies and electrical providers, they need to be public, nonprofit institutions. Monopolies and private sector don't mix. You don't mix those two. Monopolies belong to the public sector.
Thank you, Eric. So we've been talking about the cost of living in Indiana, but there's another kind of cost, the human cost of what happens when the state pulls the safety net out from under its most vulnerable residents. That brings us to the Senate Republicans' top priority of the 2026 session, Senate Enrolled Act 1 this year, their so-called welfare reform bill, and the beginning of our conversation about health care. SEA 1 tightens eligibility and verification requirements for both Medicaid and SNAP, more frequent eligibility checks, stricter work requirements, new immigration status verification for entire households, and reduced renewal periods for the Healthy Indiana plan from 12 months down to 6. Republicans call it cracking down on waste, fraud, and abuse. But here's the irony: all that extra means testing requires additional government resources to administer. For a party that never stops talking about smaller government and fiscal responsibility, they just built a bigger bureaucracy, not to help people, but to make it harder for eligible Hoosiers to get and keep coverage they're legally entitled to. According to an analysis by the advocacy group Hoosier Action, more than 100,000 Hoosiers could lose Medicaid coverage as a result. And as my own state senator, Shelley Yoder of Bloomington, pointed out, Indiana's new rules are now more restrictive than what even the Trump administration has implemented at the federal level. 4 Republicans voted against it. Every Democrat voted no. Indiana already has nearly 300,000 households on SNAP and hundreds of thousands more on Medicaid. These are working people, seniors, children, and people with disabilities, not the mythical welfare fraud that Republicans used to sell this bill. So here's the question. What is Indiana's obligation to its most vulnerable residents when it comes to healthcare access? And given that the Healthy Indiana Plan already exists as a framework, do you support expanding it to cover more Hoosiers, or do you have a different vision for how the state addresses the healthcare coverage gap? Eric, I'll start with you.
So I want to start off with identifying who the true welfare queens are that drain public resources. It's monopoly corporations. It's not individuals and families. That's the oldest trick in the book, is blaming individuals and families who are numerically, financially a smaller burden on the tax budget than monopoly corporations, and for ideas like privatizing power companies, which is handing subsidies over to private companies. Austerity economics is what motivated that legislation. Austerity doesn't work. It's illogical. I might diverge maybe from Michelle or maybe from the Democratic Party a bit. I liked the balanced budget amendment that we have. Indiana can keep a balanced budget. We can also spend more on welfare, and this isn't a trade-off. Where do we get the money? It's by fixing our tax code, our broken tax code that doesn't tax enough on monopolies, as I was saying, that use our public resources. Fixing our tax code solves these spending questions and respects our balanced budget amendment.
Thank you, Eric. Michelle, let's hear from you.
So this one is really personal for me. I have been working with individuals with disabilities for almost 2 decades. The present way that Republicans in Indiana went about this has already kicked people off of Medicaid, people that are already struggling, people with disabilities, the elderly, the disabled. This is not something that should be negotiable. We need to be funding our welfare system. Supplemental nutrition and assistance programs should be funded. If we are not going to fully fund school meals, then we need to be funding SNAP, because sometimes that's going to be the only way that children are going to eat. The legalization of marijuana could bring in hundreds of millions of dollars in tax revenue. There's absolutely zero reason why we cannot utilize that revenue to support our welfare programs.
Thank you, Michelle. And thank you to that red-winged blackbird that I think that you've got in your neighborhood there, Eric.
Oh, you gotta
No, I recognize that call. So those Medicaid cuts we just discussed are closing maternity wards. The state's near total abortion ban is driving away the doctors who would staff them. Different causes, same result. Hoosier women losing access to basic reproductive health care. Johnson Memorial Health in Franklin just became the 16th Indiana hospital to close its maternity ward since 2020. About 40% of its deliveries were covered by Medicaid, which reimburses hospitals for just 57 cents on the dollar, the 8th lowest rate in the nation. And Indiana's near-total abortion ban has created an environment of legal uncertainty so severe that OBGYNs are leaving the state rather than risk prosecution for making routine medical decisions. Indiana saw more than a 9% drop in medical residency applications after the ban took effect. The IU School of Medicine is now sending its own OBGYN residents to Illinois for training because they can't get adequate experience here. 1 in 4 rural Indiana counties is already considered a maternity care desert. This isn't just about abortion, it's about whether Indiana is a place where women can safely have babies at all. Now, in a Democratic primary debate, I suspect we all know where you stand on the abortion ban itself, so I'm not going to ask you about that. What I do want to ask is this. Given that you cannot repeal the ban from the minority caucus, what specific steps would you take to keep Indiana's maternal health care system from collapsing around it? And Michelle, I'll start with you.
So first and foremost, we need to hold commercial insurers accountable, because what happens is that when you are, Medicaid pays timely. They pay every single week. Despite the fact that they pay substantially lower rates, they do pay timely. So a lot of times, especially in rural areas, those hospitals are surviving off of that. I mean, even with people that have commercial insurance, we have to hold our commercial insurers accountable to paying their bills and paying them timely. We need to raise the Medicaid rates to something that is sustainable based on data, based on research, and based on cost surveys. The cost of care is substantially greater than what Medicaid is going to pay. So we need to make sure that those rates are going to come up, but we also need to make sure that commercial insurers are paying their bills and paying them timely. That's going to help support rural healthcare. As far as abortion is healthcare. Let's make this very, very clear. Abortion is healthcare. A D&C is considered an abortive procedure and is healthcare. Indiana currently hates women, if we're being totally honest, and that has to change.
Thank you, Michelle. Eric, let's hear from you.
Mm-hmm. An abortion to me is something like when a family or a doctor has to make one of the most difficult decisions. It's never supposed to be a good thing. It's never supposed to be a celebratory thing. So to me, I'm never going to get in between a doctor and a patient, and the government shouldn't be getting in between doctors and patients. And I'm with Michelle on it being healthcare. I have a pro-life angle in that I want a state where it is affordable to raise children, where abortion isn't the financially safe option. We need to be investing in public programs, childcare, healthcare, you name it, to make it easier to have a child, to raise a family in here. The housing situation is big for being able to afford raising a family. We can also kind of come at the Republicans from a libertarian angle, because this is a case of government interference causing prices to rise and messing with an industry that, if we just allow some competition, the prices would go down. If we have more doctors, more healthcare providers, that's more options for people, lower costs.
Thank you, Eric. You sort of walked me into my next question here.
Oh.
So the Republican supermajority is forcing Hoosier women to give birth. But once those children arrive, you're on your own. Let's look at the state of childcare and education in Indiana. So the state's childcare voucher program has been closed to new enrollees for over a year. The wait list has topped 30,000 children. No new vouchers will be issued until at least 2027. And while families wait, the state slashed reimbursement rates to providers, cutting payments for infant care by 10%, preschoolers by 15%, and school-age children by 35%. Providers are closing. Families are making impossible choices between work and childcare they simply can't afford. This session, Republicans passed House Enrolled Act 1177, expanding a tax credit for employers and allowing local TIF districts to fund childcare, a drop in the bucket for 30,000 kids on a waiting list. So here's the question. The state constitution treats K through 12 education as a right. Should it treat childcare the same way? And what would that actually look like in practice? Eric, you're up.
Education is a right, and we should be implementing that. And childcare should be included with all the other parts of education that makes it a right for our residents. Um, our state, the federal government's not in this particular field. The federal government deals with other stuff. This is for the state government. I don't have children, and so I didn't really know about this childcare affordability issue until I worked at Aspire. A lot of those events, childcare kept coming up. The seats are so few, the price for those seats are so high. This rings a little bit to me like the other issues we talked about with healthcare, and it rings like we're subsidizing monopolies, we're subsidizing companies that are private sector companies, but we're making it more expensive in the process. More childcare opportunities need to be provided. The state can, in the revenue side, it can pay for these things with the tax reforms I've talked about. The state can provide more childcare options, and like anything else, when we increase the supply, increase the amount of options, guess what? The price goes down, costs go down.
Thank you, Eric. Michelle, what say you?
So having had a child that went to daycare, I can personally attest that daycare is incredibly expensive, and many families are making choices that, am I literally just working to pay for my child's daycare, especially when you have more than one child. For an infant, presently, if you are a state licensed facility, your ratio is 1-3. So you have one individual for 3 infants. And a typical cost for a week of daycare for an infant is between like $300 to $350. So when you assume that you are paying somebody to be that 1-3, you're at about $900 to $950. So what you're paying your employee isn't even coming out to, sometimes you're basically breaking even. So we need to do better as a state in providing subsidies and, tax breaks for childcare facilities. That's the only way that we're going to increase access.
Thank you, Michelle. So as we mentioned, Indiana's constitution requires the state to provide a free, uniform system of public education. Despite that, and some would argue in direct contravention of it, Indiana Republicans have spent the last decade systematically defunding that system in favor of privatization. The state's voucher program now costs nearly $500 million a year, money pulled from the same pot that funds traditional public schools. And starting this upcoming school year, Indiana becomes a universal voucher state, no income cap, every family eligible, regardless of wealth. That means public money flowing to private schools, religious schools, and for-profit charter operators with far less accountability than we demand of our public schools. And it's not just Republicans driving this. Even some Democrats, like Indianapolis Mayor Joe Hogsett, have embraced school privatization. So here's the question. Where do you stand? Do you support fully funded, fully public education as the constitutional baseline, or do you believe there is a legitimate role for vouchers and for-profit charters in Indiana's education system? Michelle, this one goes first to you.
Our public schools should be fully funded, and our tax dollars that are supposed to be going to our public schools should not be going to school vouchers. As far as school vouchers are concerned, to have that open voucher, that benefits the wealthy, people that can already afford private school. There's absolutely zero reason why we should be funding somebody else's private education. My children go to public school, and they're getting a good education in public school. If we are funding our public schools the way that we should be, then there wouldn't be a need for private school unless it is something that's what your family chooses and you can pay for it. If you want something else, then Indiana, you can homeschool. There are other options other than publicly funding private school.
Thank you, Michelle. Eric, let's hear from you.
Michelle, on this, publicly funded education and school choice, they call it, are not in conflict with each other. Actually, as a matter of fact, I think defunding public education, that's the anti-school choice decision, because private sector, I'm going to sound like I'm repeating myself, but it's kind of the same formula with these other issues we're talking about. We are crossing two things that shouldn't be crossed. We shouldn't be taking private sector entities into the public sector and absorbing public money. Public schooling needs to be fully well-funded, and that simply does not take away the private sector options. When people want a specific religious education for their child, nobody's banning that. Nobody's banning your religion's schools. You just can't take money out of our public system, because there's lots of people who want to use it, and that's just, at that point, that's almost theft. It's just a misallocation of resources. It's just another one of these things of not allowing public goods institutions to be privatized.
Thanks, Eric. So let's move from K-12 to higher education. Now, Indiana Republicans will tell you they are great champions of workforce development, and sure, aligning Ivy Tech with the state's workforce needs makes sense. That's what technical education is for. But somewhere along the way, Republicans decided that universities should work the same way. If a degree doesn't lead directly to a high-paying job, it shouldn't exist. Indiana has cut hundreds of academic programs across its public universities, and at Indiana University specifically, Governor Braun used a last-minute budget provision inserted without public debate to seize full control of the IU Board of Trustees, removing alumni elected members and replacing them with MAGA loyalists. The ACLU has sued. A federal court has already ruled some of IU's resulting policies unconstitutional. And the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression now ranks IU 255th nationally on campus free speech, the lowest rated public university in America. But hey, how about that football team? The question is this: what is the proper relationship between the state and its public universities, and what specific steps would you take to protect Indiana's higher education system from becoming a political project while ensuring it serves both the workforce needs of our state and the broader mission of producing informed, engaged citizens? Eric, I'll start with you.
So I'm currently paying off my debt on a degree I got from Indiana University, Indianapolis. And I'm thinking about it the whole time, and I'm thinking about how much better it would be if we just made it a simple public option. Universities, schooling should just be a public option. Tuition-free college is totally affordable and possible for our state if we fix our tax issue. We also don't need to do political meddling in the hierarchy of colleges. I kind of like the independence of universities if they're not used as an electoral game piece by politicians. We just let trustees and academics just, form those institutions as they are, keep them independent. A lot of what's happened with college affordability is banks are printing money and sending it out to pay for these high tuition costs. Colleges see that, and if they see an infinite flow of money coming in from banks in the form of student loans, and especially since you can't declare bankruptcy on student loans like any other loan, they're going to jack up tuitions. So it's like the other issues. We need to keep it affordable and in the public sector and not any other way.
Thank you, Eric. Michelle, let's hear from you.
So just like Eric, I have student loans. And I will probably be paying on those student loans until the day that I die. We definitely need to be funding our public universities. The GOP definitely doesn't want that, because statistically, the higher level of education you have, the more liberal you're thinking and the more liberally you vote. So in order to keep their voting basis, they intentionally are keeping people uneducated and uninformed. From the standpoint of funding our universities, I do agree with Eric. We have to fix our tax code. There has to be some way, somehow, to keep corporations in check and to ensure that people can reasonably live and get an education in order to get those higher paying jobs. Also, we shouldn't be basing what is considered a high paying job or field arbitrarily.
Thank you, Michelle. So we've covered a lot of ground today, but before we get to our closing statements, I want to try something a little different. I host a podcast called Who's Left Indiana from an unapologetically left-wing perspective. But the Hoosier Democratic spectrum runs all the way from avowed socialists like Indianapolis City County Councilman Jesse Brown to anti-choice warhawk blue dog former U.S. Senator Joe Donnelly. There are real disagreements within our big tent, sometimes sharp ones, and voters deserve to know where the people asking for their vote actually stand. So this segment is called Who's Left Asks Who's Right. Here's how it works. I'm going to present two positions, both held by Democrats, on a single issue. Then I'm going to ask you, who's right? Where do you come down? So let's get into it. Indiana Democratic Mayor Tom McDermott of Hammond has been one of the most enthusiastic cheerleaders for bringing the Chicago Bears to Northwest Indiana, arguing it would be a transformational economic development win for a region that desperately needs one. Meanwhile, Virginia Democratic Congressman Don Beyer has co-authored federal legislation to end public stadium subsidies entirely, arguing that the economic case for these deals has been repeatedly discredited and that billionaire owners who need cash to finance a stadium can borrow from the market like any other business. McDermott or Beyer? Who's right? Michelle? Then Eric. Michelle.
So I'm gonna have to go with our billionaires should be funding those, even though I grew up in the region, and bear down, baby.
Eric, how about you?
I'm with Beyer on that one for sure.
Thank you. So we just talked about organized labor's support for the Bears deal. The same dynamic plays out with data centers. Building trades unions and Democratic mayors like Michigan City's Angie Nelson Deitch argue that data centers bring good-paying construction jobs and desperately needed economic investment to communities that have been left behind. But Citizens Action Coalition Program Director Ben Inskeep calls hyperscale data centers the single biggest threat to affordability, reliability, and environmental sustainability in Indiana this decade, arguing the state is handing billions in tax subsidies to trillion-dollar tech companies that create almost no permanent jobs while shifting massive utility costs onto working Hoosiers. Nelson Deutsch or Inskeep? Who's right? Eric?
I'm going to say the second guy and also throw in tax lands in there too.
Michelle?
I'm gonna have to agree with Eric on this one, the second one. And I'm married to a union construction worker. So if we actually, believe in quality, like, yes, union all the way.
So, California Governor Gavin Newsom, a likely 2028 presidential candidate, has staked out a series of positions that put him at odds with much of his party on trans issues. He's called trans women competing in women's sports, quote, deeply unfair. He's urged Democrats to stop talking about pronouns and be more, quote, culturally normal. He cut $17 million in LGBTQ health funding in California's budget. He vetoed gender-affirming care legislation, and he called Trump's ad attacking Kamala Harris for supporting gender-affirming care for incarcerated trans people devastating, essentially validating the Republican attack. Meanwhile, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal and Senator Ed Markey reintroduced the Transgender Bill of Rights earlier this year declaring that trans rights are human rights and that when Republicans use trans people as political scapegoats, the only appropriate Democratic response is to get louder, not quieter. Newsom or Jayapal and Markey, who's right? Michelle?
Trans rights are human rights. Let me say that
Thank
again,
you.
louder for those in the back. Trans rights are human rights. Period.
And Eric.
I'm going to pass on the performative vote-getting side of Newsom, and I'm going to go with the more authentic, everyone has human rights position.
Thank you. So this one hits near home. In neighboring Marion County, Democratic Party Chair Mila Eldridge successfully challenged the credentials of dozens of would-be convention delegates and precinct committee persons, Democrats, who had strategically pulled a Republican ballot in 2024 to vote against extremists like Mike Braun and Donald Trump in the primary, even though these same people have documented histories of working for Democratic candidates and causes. Eldridge's position, rules are rules. On the other side, congressional candidate Destiny Wells provided pro bono legal assistance to the challenged candidates, arguing that Eldridge was using the rules as a weapon to protect her own political machine and shut out grassroots Democrats who had made a tactical decision, one that had been actively encouraged by groups like Recenter Indiana. Eldridge or Wells? Who's right? Eric?
I'm with the grassroots Democrat movement on that. We need more engagement from non-special interest groups.
And Michelle?
I'm going to agree with Eric.
So, Democratic mayors across Indiana, including Bloomington's Kerry Thompson and Fort Wayne's Sharon Tucker, have partnered with Flock Safety, an Atlanta-based surveillance company that places license plate reading cameras across their cities, arguing it's an effective public safety tool. Meanwhile, Democratic Congress members Raja Krishnamurthy and Robert Garcia have launched a formal congressional investigation into Flock, arguing the company enables invasive surveillance practices that threaten the privacy, safety, and civil liberties of immigrants and other vulnerable Americans, and that ICE has accessed Flock data through backdoors that local officials didn't even authorize. Thompson and Tucker, or Krishnamurthy and Garcia? Who's right? Michelle?
I don't know that I really am on one side of the fence or the other on that one.
And Eric?
I'm firmly on the Krishnamurthy Garcia side. Don't like the surveillance state.
And our last one. This one is particularly personable to Indiana Democrats right now. In the race for Indiana Secretary of State, Democratic candidate Bo Bai has accepted high-dollar contributions from Trump-aligned billionaires, school privatization champions, and other donors whose values appear to be at odds with the Democratic parties. Bai's argument, it takes money to win statewide in Indiana, and you take it where you can get it. His opponent, Blythe Potter, has argued that the source of the money matters, and at best these contributions look bad, and at worst they suggest these donors are buying influence or expecting something in return. But this isn't just about one race. It is a question every Democrat running in hostile territory has to answer. Does the source of your funding matter? And is there a point where the money you take compromises what you stand for? So, on this issue, Bai or Potter, who's right? Eric?
I'm with Potter until Bai can take that money and use it to take money out of politics and pass, get that kind of policy going.
And Michelle?
I'm with Blythe on this one.
All right. Thank you both. So we've covered a lot of ground today. Housing, affordability, healthcare, education, and some of the fault lines within our own party that don't always get aired in public. These are important conversations. And there are still plenty of issues that matter to Hoosier voters that we didn't even get a chance to touch. But for now, each candidate will have 2 minutes for a closing statement. And by coin flip before the debate, we decided that Eric will go first. Eric, your 2 minutes begin now.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you for having me on this program. And I'm really excited about this primary election. No matter who wins, I'll support Michelle if she wins. I believe she said she'd help me along if I win. So it's totally on good faith that we're doing this. I really hope to make some changes to our tax code. The direction I want to take the Democratic Party is I'm not in favor of price controls. I think that's their usual regulation way of going about it. I want to look past and beyond price controls and look right at the root issue of the tax code. The tax code and also monetary policy, what's going on with our banking system. Those two things I think those are the levers that really affect the economy the most. If I could take the Democratic Party in that direction and also make the housing affordability issue front and center. I want a coalition build with people who agree with me and people who disagree with me, Republicans, conservatives, liberals, libertarians, Green Party, anybody. And I invite them to, I'll call it my house party. You know, it would be like a caucus in the legislative sense. And, you know, we need to build a coalition with Republicans, even if we disagree on this or that issue, because we all live here together in this state. And we would all benefit from the same things if we stop giving the store away to the largest corporations on the planet.
Thank you, Eric. And the last word today goes to Michelle. Michelle, you got 2 minutes.
Thank you so much for having both of us. Eric, it has been great getting to know you and your policy, and 1,000%. Regardless of who wins this primary, I think that, you know, we've got to stick together to make sure that we can get the numbers to win in November, because that's truly the priority here. As far as, you know, we have to be able to try to move forward in Indiana. And we also have to be able to move forward while working together. As a legislator, we are working for the people. That is something that I very firmly believe in. And I believe that we have to be the voice for the people that we serve. I have been doing that for nearly 20 years, being the voice for the voiceless, as far as in my business for the last 10, and prior to that in my academic and employment journeys. We need to make sure that we're holding large corporations accountable. We need to be taxing people that are making exorbitant amounts of money. We need to ensure that we are supporting women. We need to be able to ensure that we're supporting women in the workforce by subsidizing and providing tax breaks for childcare providers. We also need to make sure that we are finding ways to support our Medicare and our Medicaid systems by legalizing marijuana. It's definitely time for that. In closing, it has been an absolute joy to be here today, despite all of the technical difficulties. So thank you, Scott and HoosLeft, for having both of us today.
Thank you, Michelle. So before we sign off, I want to say something directly to both Michelle and Eric. Thank you for being here, for submitting yourself to the judgment of voters, for putting your own lives on hold in pursuit of service. Running for office is not easy. It is an act of vulnerability that takes a whole lot of courage, and that alone deserves recognition regardless of where voters ultimately land. The issues we talked about today are not abstract. They are about whether families in District 58 can afford to stay there, whether schools have the resources they need, whether people can access healthcare when they need it, whether the communities growing up around us grow in ways that serve everyone, not just the powerful. Primary elections like this one don't get the attention they deserve, but they are where the direction of the party is decided. For the voters of House District 58, that decision now belongs to you. Take the time to learn, ask questions, and then make your voice heard. Thank you to everyone watching. Thank you to Derek Holder for manning the controls today, and thank you to our subscribers at Progressive Indiana Network. You make events like this possible. Find us at progressiveindiana.net. Join us Thursday, April 2nd at 7 p.m. Eastern for our next debate featuring candidates from House District 63 in Southwest Indiana. Until then, I'm Scott Aaron Rogers. Love each other, Indiana.